you ask for time.
Thanks, Piero. My name is Katharine Hawthorne. I was a student here at Stanford studying physics and dance, and I actually hung around this building quite a bit, looking at the overlap between the two. And my talk is called Choreography as Research. I'm going to show a bunch of excerpts of some of my recent work as a way of talking about what I do. And yeah, we're going to start out. This is Megan Wright, who is a collaborator of mine from San Francisco, who is here to help bring some of this work to life. So we're going to start with an excerpt from Analog, which is my most recent work. So that's just a little taste, and we'll talk more about where that comes from. I wanted to introduce this idea of techne, which is the Greek root that forms the word technology. Techne, as a root, is more about a process of bringing forth and in framing, and as such, I think it applies not only to technology, but also in the Greek, it talked about craftsmanship and the arts as well. So I think this is really where I'm situating what I'm doing. At the overlap between these two things. And I have a quote from Heidegger that I find useful in framing my work. Because the essence of technology is nothing technological, essential reflection upon technology and decisive confrontation with it must happen in a realm that is, on the one hand, akin to the essence of technology, and on the other, fundamentally different from it. Such a realm is art. So, in terms of form and content, what do I do? I am a dancer and a choreographer. I have over 15 years of dance training and experience dancing with various choreographers and dance companies over the past 7 years. I am also someone who is deeply passionate about physics and mathematics and the foundations of the natural world. I often say that my compositional education comes from physics, whereas my dance training is what gives me the ability to find physical expression. The way I think about putting dances together is more drawn from my understanding of experimental science and the natural world. So Analog, the excerpt that we just showed you, and we'll show you some more excerpts throughout the course of the talk, was a dance about the mechanics of human motion. And we were inspired by these patent drawings of images of mechanical representations of the body, such as the prosthetic hand that you saw in the title slide. We also used an overhead projector to display these patent images in the performance space, so the dancers really interacted with the image and the technical drawings. Lumenlux is an older work that I'm also going to be showing some excerpts of, and it explores light as a movement element. One of the first things that you learn about light from the scientific perspective is that it is constantly in motion, which is something that, for those of us who spend a lot of time indoors with artificial light, is somewhat counterintuitive. We often think of, or at least in our everyday experience, come to think of light as being stationary or environmental. So in this piece, I was really interested in exploring how we could change the perception of light being something that was constantly in motion. My work tends to explore physical states as opposed to more traditional compositional or choreographic tools of sort of shape and line. What that means is there might be a section in which the dancers are exploring falling or the effect of gravity or they might be exploring a understanding of what it means to crumble or to break, as opposed to sort of a more traditional form-based sort of choreography. We treat the studio as laboratory and rehearsal as research. The medium that we use is the human body in motion and the human experience. So I'd like to show an excerpt from Lumen. What you are about to see is a superposition of maybe 6 or 7 different physical states. So there are maybe 6 gestures, motions that we are able to choose from, but the combination of them happens in real time. So the trajectory and the order and the structure of what you see is unscripted, and it unfolds differently every time we do it. So the next excerpt that I want to show is actually a video clip from Analog, and it is a movement sequence that's structured in the same way as what we just showed you in person. I'm going to just hit play because I think the sound isn't working, and then I'll talk over it. Basically, the 3 dancers have a series of motions that they are combining in real time, and then they're also given the task of sort of rearranging themselves, and then there's an overall trajectory to what is happening. So when I think about structuring movement this way, it may seem overly simplistic or like an obvious choice, but I think this is actually a very different way of thinking about generating movement in choreography than what traditionally happens in dance. Basically, I'm thinking about setting up an experiment with a set of initial conditions. These 3 people start here, and then they have a certain number of modes of expression that are then overlaid and sort of reactive to each other. One of the things that I'm interested with in this score is how giving dancers these very specific tasks, but then also giving them the responsibility to make the decision making in real time, brings a sort of liveliness and intensity to the performance that I often find missing from more traditional dance performance. Another thing that I find really fascinating about this sort of a score is that as the audience, you sort of catch on to what's happening, and then your perception of watching the dancers move changes over time. In particular with this score, as it develops speed and intensity and has an element of endurance and duration. one of the things that we were exploring in analog is sort of an out-of-date understanding of the body, or a way of thinking about the body that breaks it down into its component parts and then tries to put it back together. And I think this movement score demonstrates that pretty well, by limiting sort of the expression that the dancers' bodies can take, and then putting them together to become a three-person machine. So talking a little bit more about the foundations of the work that I do, or maybe the conceptual exploration behind it. In Kate's talk, she talked about how both art and science ask us to enter into this mystery and ambiguity, and I agree, but I also disagree, because I think that often in science it's about defining a set of questions and then finding answers to those set of questions. Whereas I think that art has the possibility to expand the scope of the question, and also to ask a question and not necessarily provide an answer. One of my favorite quotes by Alan Lightman is, "Ambiguity is an essential part of art." And what I do, indeterminacy and ambiguity, is a very important part not only of the process, but the performance. I'm really interested in staging elements of improvisation and real-time decision-making on stage, because I think there is a liveliness, and that there is also a naturalness. It reflects what I see in the natural world. And so I'm interested in posing those problems to bodies that are moving on stage. I think the things that we've showed you so far have showed how, in particular, the section from Lumen and then the three-person machine from Analog have showed how limiting expression and then sort of superposing these states can provide a structure for choreography. I also work with much more broadly scripted forms of movement generation, and so we're going to show you two duets from Analog that are, I think, much more wide open in terms of the physical landscape, although there is a very rich mental landscape that goes with it. Sasha, can we have just a little bit more volume? I don't know if I should do that on the computer, or you want to do it there? Yeah. So the score for that duet is it's basically that we're imagining the torso is some sort of mechanical object or machine, and there's a gear that has come loose and is rattling around inside of the torso. So while there's a very rich imaginative landscape, that looks vastly different on anyone who tries to do it. And then the other aspect of the duet is this element of physical contact, which acts as sort of a reset or on-off switch. And actually the next thing that we're going to show, which we call the electricity or toaster duet, also uses the point of contact as a sort of on-off switch. So a very different take on what a duet could be. Also starting from a pretty minimal prompt and allowing it to unfold. So setting the initial conditions, creating an environment where something can happen, and then letting the system unfold. So I want to talk a little bit about, showed you how these different pieces are generated, and then talk a little bit how they might fit together to create a performance experience. In the same way that a lot of these structures have a great deal of indeterminacy in how the movement itself is generated, I'm very committed to having a performance event have that same sort of liveness and indeterminacy. And my experience of performing my work is that it is a complex system, that at any point a decision by another dancer, by the lighting technician, by someone sitting in the front row could impact what happens and change the course of the event. So there's a lot of space for real-time decision-making. And this says movement phrase work as a container, not as contained. But I think for those who are more familiar with the way dance is traditionally developed, movement phrase work is often where a choreographer will start. They'll come into the studio and teach the dancers a sequence of steps. And then through the process, that sequence of steps gets rearranged and reformed and becomes the dance. For me, it's really the reverse process, that we come into this space and we sort of come to understand these physical principles and the relationships between us, and then if there's a statement that comes out of that at the end, that's the phrase. And in many ways, the phrase contains all of these elements within it. So as a way of showing you how I might structure something like that, I'm going to show an excerpt from Analog. This is what we call phrase one. I'll talk a little bit over it, but you should be able to. Thanks, Sasha. There are elements in here from what we've done. So while there's a sequence of movement here, this moment here contains the rattling, that impulse, and you can see how different it is on each body. This phrase also contains moments that are what I would consider holes or open moments where the dancers are choosing to go forward or to stay where they are based on the information that's around them. This is different than how dance is normally structured. You normally move forward in time and space in sort of a more even trajectory. It.